This is Jacqueline Weller with Modern Pagan TV. And now it's time for Ask the Living Goddess. You may have wondered, what are psychic abilities? They are normal, natural human abilities that people of any age, ethnic group, or religion might have. There does appear to be a genetic component because these abilities run in families. Of course, some cultures or religions may not be accepting of psychic abilities, even though they are normal and natural. We have found times and places where people who were psychic were persecuted, both historically and still, unfortunately, in contemporary times. There are even witch burnings still going on today in the continent of Africa. Years ago, I met a woman who was psychic here in the Denver area, and she told me a story about having a cross burnt on her lawn by the Ku Klux Klan in Aurora, an eastern suburb of Denver, in the 1960s. She was a young married woman at that point with young children at home, and the irony of her story is that she was then and still is a nice Christian woman who just happened to be psychic. She was forced out. She and her family were forced out of Aurora during that incident because, of course, they were terrified and had to pack up and find a different place to live. Modern science does not accept psychic abilities, basically because science does not accept what it doesn't know how to measure. I don't think that there's a contradiction between our psychic abilities and many of the findings of modern science. But, of course, many atheists and scientists would disbelieve, would disagree with us. In fact, I was skeptical for many years, till I finally had so many years of experience with all of this that I had to admit this was all really going on. The irony of that is that I've been psychic since I was a little girl. Let's give some definitions of psychic abilities. For example, you may be familiar with the word ESP, not so much in common usage today, more in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, but ESP stands for extrasensory perception. That is, anything that's beyond the ordinary senses of sight, hearing, feeling, taste, or smell. So anything that we understand, any information that's coming to us that's beyond those regular senses or extrasensory. There are many ways that the psychic information can come to us. Some people see pictures, almost like a movie going on without the sidetrack. And that is called clairvoyance, when we see things that are psychic in nature. If we hear them, that's called clairaudience. It's like hearing someone telling us something or hearing the dialogue of a movie going on without the pictures. Clairsentience is the body-based, the feeling or knowing psychic information. And no one of these is any better than the other. They're all valuable ways to receive the information. When I was a little girl, the ability I've had since I was very young was the clairsentience. I'm an empath. I have always felt other people's feelings. But as I worked and developed my psychic abilities later as an adult, then the clairaudience and the clairvoyance came in as well. And nowadays I work with all three. Just out of interest, you might be curious about the meaning of the words occult, arcane, and esoteric, because they get bandied around a lot and people really don't know what they mean. The dictionary definition of occult is hidden, concealed, secret, or mystic knowledge. Arcane also means secret or hidden, and esoteric means confidential, private, known only by a select few. Of course, it used to be that information about mystical, metaphysical, and psychic phenomena was occult or hidden or secretive. But nowadays there's books and information on the internet everywhere you might like to look about these subjects. So, these psychic abilities can show up as many different talents. Some people have telepathy, the psychic communication through thought. Examples might be reading another person's mind. Animal communication, those people who are great at reading the minds and feelings of animals. Some people have a particular talent for communicating with, working with the plant kingdom. Those green thumb folks who are always great at growing things. And then there's spirit communication, working with our spirit guides or mediumship. When I was in high school, I had an experience with in a drama class. Our drama teacher was doing something innovative. She thought it might be fun to put on some music and have us do some improvisational dance, free-form dance to the music as a way of getting into the mood for a particular scene we were going to do. And while we were dancing, I started dancing with some long curtains that went up the side of the classroom. It was a very tall classroom, and it was the orchestra room, and the ceiling was very high above us. So I was dancing and playing with these curtains, and I had an image of my arms and hands extending upwards above me, reaching up into the heavens. And as I was enjoying this vision of my elongated hands, another teenager, another member of the class, became hysterical and started crying and shouting. And she said, Jackie, your hands, and was freaking right out. And the teacher immediately stopped what we were doing. And the girl said to me, your hands, your arms, they were growing up towards the sky. She had just seen mentally, psychically, what I was imagining. It was quite a to-do, and unfortunately that drama teacher never did anything innovative again. It just scared the whole thing of this hysterical teenager in her class, just scared her too much, which I was a little miffed about. I was enjoying the things we were doing that were experimental. But it does scare people. They don't understand it, especially if some kid gets hysterical along the way. Another psychic ability that you may run into is psychokinesis. Psychokinesis is psychically moving or altering physical matter. For example, weather workers who change weather patterns, shapeshifters who supposedly can change their shape into an animal or another human being, invisibility. I don't know if shape-shifting and invisibility actually happen, but I have experienced firsthand weather working. Years ago at a psychic retreat, a pagan retreat during the summer, I watched a woman who was a multi-generational witch and Wiccan do some weather working. And I watched her do this for several years in a row. We went to this festival, my ex-husband and I, for 8 years. And I saw her do this multiple times, and it worked every time. So I knew that she was actually having an effect. What would happen is she would put up a wedge in the sky to deflect weather patterns to either side of us. We were camped in this beautiful valley, and we would watch later in the day as it would be raining on either side of the valley, but we would be dry. It was a very interesting thing that she was doing. As with all psychic abilities or magical abilities, they should be handled with discretion and handled ethically. There are times when one would not want to do any weather working. In fact, one year she did none because there was a drought on in that area. The local farmers needed rain, and she didn't want to interfere with the success of their growing season. Psychokinesis, this moving of matter, seems to be one of the most difficult. psychic abilities, because I've not run into too many people who could actually do it, whereas I have run into all of the others quite a bit. For example, for years I taught a psychic development class, and one of the exercises we would do in that class would be to see if, as a group, we could concentrate mentally and move a matchstick around. We would get a bowl of water, float that matchstick on the top of the bowl, send it spinning around in one direction, and then concentrating, we would see if we could stop it and get it turned around and moving in the opposite direction. I figured that way it wouldn't just be chance, that we would actually have to really be doing something to get that big a change in its motion going on. And for all the many years I taught that class, there was only one time we managed to get it turning around, spinning around in the other direction. I do not know which person in that class, or whether it was the combination of all of us working together in that particular group, managed to do that. But that was the one time we actually managed to make that happen. Another common psychic ability is psychometry, and that is sensing and working with the energies of material things. For example, people who are the rock people, the gemstone people, who work with the mineral and crystal energies. People who work with objects, picking up psychic information from a photograph or from an article of clothing or jewelry. Those are examples of psychometry. Also, energy healing, empathy, which is feeling other people's feelings and energies. Geomancy, working with the earth-based energies. Dowsing and pendling, all of those could be examples of psychometry. Geomancy, for example, working with the earth energies, is something that is significant here in the Rocky Mountains. The Rocky Mountains have an energy of their own that many of the people who live here in the mountains or on the plains have noticed and worked with over the years. And the Native American peoples who lived here often talked about the energy of the Rockies as well. Divination is when you get information using your psychic abilities, your ESP, get information that you share with other people. For example, foreknowledge, prescience, or precognition is getting information about the future. But you can also get information about the past, even past lives, doing past life readings. Some people are good at finding lost objects. Some people are good at channeling or bringing through divine entities or beings. Channeling or divine possession, some people call that aspecting, have been used in religious ceremony since the dawn of human religious practice. There are many different divinatory tools. It doesn't really matter which ones you use. There's reading signs and omens. Scrying, which is staring at something long enough that you go into an altered state, whether you're staring at a crystal ball or a black mirror or reading signs and omens in the clouds. I have a funny story about that. One of my first teachers, magical teachers, used to read beer foam. When he was in college, he always got a laugh. He would go to the pub with his friends. He would start doing a divinatory reading, a psychic reading, reading the beer foam. He would always get a laugh, but then he'd blow them away because he'd give them some really good information. It doesn't matter what you stare at. The act of staring itself can take you into an altered state and help you do the scrying. Different cultures develop different tools for divination, the tarot cards, the I Ching, the runes, astrology. There are many different tools that people have used over the eons. There are different patterns in how psychic abilities show up for people. Some people have always had them since they were little. I ran into a psychic who told me that she was 3 years old when she realized she could do something no one else could do. She could see auras around people and around things. This woman had always done that and hadn't realized till she was 3 years old that other people did not do this. And how her story went was that she was living on a farm with her family, and there were cats and kittens living on the farm with them. One of those wildcat mamas had some kittens out in the yard, and unfortunately one of the kitties climbed up into a rain barrel which had water in it and drowned. Before the animal drowned, it took a couple days, unfortunately, for the poor thing to go, and it must have been, frantically dog paddling the whole time, and before it died. And during that whole time that the kitten was struggling in the rain barrel, the little girl saw a black cloud of energy over the rain barrel. Then when her parents found the dead kitten and were talking about how sad it was, she was very, very angry at them. Well, if you saw the black cloud, why didn't you do something? Why didn't you save the kitten? And they said, what are you talking about? What black cloud? The black cloud over the rain barrel. When you saw that, why didn't you save the kitten? Why did you let the kitten die? And it took her a few days, but finally she understood. They hadn't seen that. Some people find the psychic abilities coming on as they get older, with perhaps no real explanation of why that goes on. Some people find their abilities developing with deliberate study and practice. Like any other skill or ability, if you work with it, if you practice, it gets better, it develops. Some people find the abilities suddenly coming on with a physical trauma, a near-death experience, or a major spiritual opening. I combined my natural ability, having been clairsentient and an empath since I was a little girl, with practice. And so I used a couple of those patterns, I guess, in my own development. How might you increase your own psychic abilities if you're interested in doing so? Generally, the more time you spend in altered state of mind, which we can also call trance state, meditative state, or hypnotic state, the more time you spend in trance, the more your psychic abilities will develop. You can also practice psychic development exercises, and there's plenty of books out in this area that will give you ideas about exercises you can do. There's also a connection with energetic openings of the chakras. You may know that the chakras are energy centers in our body, and they rotate, and they can open and close like the iris of the eye or the lens of an old-fashioned camera. The more that you open certain of the chakras that are associated with psychic development, the more that ability will increase for you. But you need to know how to do this safely. There's some basic safeties that it's good to learn early on in the process of developing your own psychic powers. Psychic shielding, grounding, and centering are three bases that are very important to develop. Psychic shielding is learning how to make the outer edge of your own energy field, of your aura, into a filter so that it filters out anything negative, harmful, parasitic, hurtful. Grounding is being able to make a grounding connection with the earth energies below us, being able to send our energy down into the earth. It's particularly good if one tends to be overly cerebral. It brings one back to earth. Grounding helps us stay connected with what's going on in the here and now. It brings us back to our bodies and the material world. So if someone has a problem getting too far out in the astral plane and having difficulty coming back, grounding is a very important thing to know how to do. Centering is associated with our ego self and our self-knowledge. People who have very poor ego development are probably not the best ones to be doing psychic exploration or out-of-body travel or other such things. They could possibly get into trouble by being poorly defined in terms of their ego strength to begin with, and then going too far out might get them into trouble. So these are all basics, safeties, the shielding, the grounding, and the centering, that are good to learn before becoming good at opening oneself spiritually and psychically. Opening up too fast can also be harmful sometimes. It can be dangerous to one's equilibrium. It can really be life-changing, and you should think about whether you're ready for major life changes before asking for them to come. You might also like to ask what you're willing to give up. People say to me all of the time that they would like to be able to do what I do. You know, I'll be doing a reading at a psychic fair or at a metaphysical store, and they'll look at me and they'll say, I want to be able to do that. And often they have not thought about the fact that this can be a burden. When I was in my 20s, for example, I was far too open and found it very difficult to be among groups of people. I had to learn to get better at shielding and filtering out information so that I could do some social things that I wanted to do, like go to a concert or go to a party. These sensitivities are always a little problematic. I'm far better at working with them today. They bother me less than they used to, but it's still tiring for me to be around people for very long. After a few hours, I need to get off by myself so that I can recharge my own inner storage batteries. And I'll tell you one more story before we end this today. I have a friend who's a psychic, a channeler in Tokyo. 25 years ago, she moved to Japan to work as an English teacher, and she's bilingual. While she was there working in Japan, she had a spiritual opening and began a process that she's done for over 20 years now of meditating every day and spending a lot of time on her own. Now, Japan is a country where people are a little standoffish with foreigners. They're not entirely comfortable at first with foreigners. So it was not hard for her to find a lot of time to be alone. Someone else may have found that too difficult to spend as much time alone as my friend Elizabeth did. So her spiritual opening and the development of her channeling abilities that went on over many years of quiet contemplation and meditation, she was able to do that because of the nature of the life she was leading. You might ask yourself, what are you willing to give up? What burdens might you be willing to take on when you develop these abilities? Gifts are always a double-edged sword, and there's the good and the bad that comes with them. Now, I am who I am, and I would not want to give up my sensitivities and my abilities for any reason. But I can tell you, when I was younger, they were problematic at times. Lastly, let's talk about ethics and responsibilities. With the development of any magical ability, whether it's the psychic abilities or other strengths and techniques, there's a certain responsibility that comes along with the talent and the gift. For example, I believe that it's very important to protect my clients' privacy. It's very important for me not to talk about their personal information. Personally, I do not read people's minds or ask Spirit to give me information about them unless they've given me permission to do so. I think that would be rude to stick my nose into other people's business, to go where I wasn't invited. So I don't do that. But there are some psychics who do. And I think one needs to think very carefully about the ethics of what one is doing. As well, one is a counselor, and the more one knows about good counseling practice, the better one is as a psychic reader. Sometimes I've run into people who were great natural readers. They were better than I am, perhaps, as readers, but they were very poor counselors. I would listen to what the advice they were giving people based upon what they saw and shake my head. So I hope I gave you some background about this whole area of psychic abilities, psychic development, and some of the gifts and responsibilities that come along with it all. Thank you for joining me today for Modern Pagan TV.